Enterprises are integrating voice into customer-facing applications, internal workflows, a scale and complexity that demand reliability. And the governments are deploying it to reach citizens across languages, geographies with various level of digital literacy. Use cases that are genuinely different from what it was designed to be by the startups and the private sector. Each of these contexts brings its own set of constraints, its own definition of success, and its own failure modes. And that's exactly what makes the conversation worth it. The common thread across all this is once you move from prototype to scale, the stack starts to matter in ways that you didn't anticipate. This latency, multilingual support, infra cost, evals, governance frameworks, all of that keep you what's being deployed. These aren't a theoretical concept anymore. They are problems that's being solved right now by practitioners in this room and beyond. The session is designed to surface exactly what's working, what's real constraint, and what the decision will matter in the next 12 to 18 months. Today we are using an Ignite format. Actually there are 4 speakers. Each one of them represent one layer in the voice AI stack. We will have 7 minutes each by each speaker, 7 slides and 1 minute per slide. This will be fast and practitioner led. We'll cover infra and telephony, evals and orchestration, policy and governance, and the consumer and adopter perspective. By the end of this session, you should walk away with a clear mental model of what the full stack of voice AI is, a sharp sense of where the trade-offs live, and practical signals where what you can take back, whether you are building, deploying, or governing these systems. With that, let me start the session and introduce our first speaker, Mr. Sunil Gupta. Sunil is a co-founder and CEO of Yota. Sunil is enabling India's AI infrastructure backbone through sovereign cloud and high-performance compute. He plays a key role in powering AI innovation with scalable GPU infrastructure. Welcome, Sunil, and I'll ask you to come on the stage.
Good evening. I think because this session is all about voice AI or voice enabled AI, I don't need to give the context. Indian AI is going to run on voice. Indian AI is going to run on languages. This is the context I'm sure you all must be debating since morning. I will rather specifically focus on if we have to, if we have to really go from a pilot to production scale. And that production scale is going to be masses, going to be population. Because what we are trying to address, one part is there will be people who are carrying smartphones, they are already having internet connections. So the way voice is getting carried on a data network is very, very different than the way voice is carried on a typical old generation telecom network. A bigger part of Indian population still is using feature phones. They may still be using landlines, which is our old generation calling system we all must have forgotten. By the way, even when you make a normal phone call and not a WhatsApp call, even then you are using a typical old generation PSTN system at the back end. So we are actually talking about 2 telecom networks at the back end. One is a telecom network, which is what we say is following the PSTN network, the old generation telecom network, which will be enabled when you are trying to make a call from a normal phone. And there'll be a separate network, which is a data network, where data is carrying your voice like when you talk to a Telegram or a Signal in WhatsApp. But then the voice signal is getting converted into packets and getting carried to a data network. So essentially, a voice-based AI is not just a problem of the model builders who are building the models to serve whatever context you are putting the model into. At the back end, it can be an agriculture-based model or an education-based model or healthcare-based model. But on the top of that, you are putting text-to-speech, or rather in the starting, you are putting speech-to-text model. Maybe you are putting a language conversion model in the back end. Then that is coming to your core model, which is answering your question, again converting your languages back. From that, the data output of that again is getting converted into speech, and the fun begins after that again. When it's getting converted to speech, some system, we call it voice gateway, need to identify who is the recipient of the guy who originated. Was he coming through a data network? Was he coming through a PSTN normal feature phone or a typical, the typical telephone line? So when you are talking at a population scale, besides making sure that at the back end your model is rightly designed, rightly scalable, it's not too large, the inferencing speed is very, very high, you have the right amount of fuel power in terms of GPUs and all that things, so that concurrently millions of requests can be answered. But it's also equally important that the voice network, the telecom network, which is bringing the voice call into your data center or where the model is running in, and also the network which will taking the call back to the device, to the originator, is also equally important. And that is where in Indian system, this issues start coming in, that what is the constraint? Indian telecom network, if you remember in our olden times, that they used to be marred with voice calls getting dropped. They used to be marred with noise coming in the voice lines. We also are quite used to talking in a mix of Hindi, English, Marathi, Kannada, Malayalam. We all are very, very comfortable talking in. So when you are trying to put all these things and then you add on the tab that this is millions of people trying to make all this a real time, it's not a one-time conversation, right? That in chat you are putting a prompt to the model will answer. And you're quite okay if the answer is coming, let's say in 2 seconds, 3 seconds, you're okay with that. But just imagine when you're talking to the model, you are doing a conversation the way we are as human beings are talking to each other. And we all know, when we talk to a call center, if we are not getting a response literally instantly as if we are doing a conversation, within few seconds we'll feel, oh, these guys are not responding, I'll rather disconnect my call. So the challenge here, as I'm saying again, is the telecom network, the concurrency of millions of users, the network being clean, being able to handle so much of traffic, and then taking your response, which is happening, the processing at the back end, and then carrying its own latency, and then giving to the user experience as if it's all happening in real time. So the telecom part plays as much a bigger role as much as the model part when we're talking about the voice telephony part. Of course, I'm talking, as you can see in the slide, the back-end processing part also. Beyond telecom network, when you are coming to data centers, and this is something which is not a context of voice, I'm talking on every forum, in every, right now there's so much of POCs and pilots are happening, even in conventional AI, when we are not talking about voice. But the moment you go from a POC stage or a pilot stage to a production stage, then the issue of production, the scale will start coming in. There's like a startup getting into a mature organization. Suddenly you feel now you have to supposed to start handling millions of customers. You cannot afford a downtime, something which you could have afforded in pilot stages, and you cannot afford any performance degradation also. So not only the telecom network at the back end, how much fuel power in terms of computing power you're putting in, so that the inferencing is happening at real-time speed, that also becomes equally important. So from infrastructure point of view, the computing power in data center and the whole quality of the telecom network and the efficiency of this real-time conversion between voice to data and all, that all becomes very, very important. Now, I think I was obviously, while I know format is one slide, 1 minute per slide, and there's 7 slides, but I tried to cover the whole story in general, so I'll skip something which I have just spoken. But this is a complexity in India. I just explained that normal voice feature phone and normal telephone line will use a PSTN network, the old generation telecom line. But if you are making a data call like a WhatsApp call, it follows a different network altogether. This network will have a different qualities. We obviously are talking different languages, that brings its own problem. We talk mix of language, brings its own problems. Of course, the network quality plays a role. These networks are not good. There can be always noises into that. All these things need to be taken care of when we are talking about a voice AI solution to be taken on a mass production scale. And again, I just covered that what will happen when users, instead of just using a chat interface to put a prompt and then answering, when they are just conversing in their normal language, the behavior changes. Your expectation is, if I'm not getting answer in milliseconds, I will rather drop it because I will feel the machine or whatever bot or machine I'm working is not responsive. So I will rather like all this to be very, very efficient and very, very real time. So what need to be done essentially at the back end? As I said, sizing of the compute infrastructure in data center become very important. That calculation has to be done upfront. Do it on a system. It obviously cannot be done in-house by anybody. It's just too costly. Millions of dollars will get consumed if you try to build GPUs yourself. If you try to do on cloud, just make sure the contracts you have the cloud operators is that they are able to give you lesser capacity when the traffic is less, but they are able to burst you with huge amount of GPU capacity when suddenly, let's say, the traffic is very, very high, and let's say there's a occasion like a Diwali or Independence Day or a Holi, and suddenly the traffic on the bot is very, very high, depending on the contract, can be whatever the, maybe the variation, time specific variation will be there. So how you are able to keep your cost low by keeping lesser compute in regular time, but that is scalable instantly in case the load increases and again able to come down. That type of commercial contract and that technical capability has to be there. And for sure, everything, whether it is voice network, the network telecom part, or whether the data center part, everything has to be completely redundant. As I'm saying, the things are meant to fail. I'm running GPUs for 2 years now. I know every single day my GPUs fail. When huge models like servers and all getting trained, some GPU failing will just stop the whole, the training sequence. So suddenly you just end up restarting a thing. When you are putting this thing into production, training is fine. You can stop the training, you can start retraining. But when you're into production, millions of people coming in, anything dropping, any GPU failing, any network element failing, any storage failing, any cable failing, will actually fail the whole voice transaction. So how you ensure that every single system not only is performance driven, but also is very, what we call as active deployment. If one system fails, the other component is always there, and people even don't get to know that that anything is happening at the back end. So this is something which is very, very important. These are the key lessons we need to do that. And one more thing which you can see on the right box is that because voice is so much latency sensitive, and you are talking about real-time conversations, you may not have time for your prompt, your call to go, let's say, from Guwahati to a data center in Bombay, where everything is getting processed, and then it's again traveling the telecom network to Guwahati back and giving to your device. It means the real use case of edge AI, in our language we call it edge data centers or edge processing, will actually come in if effectively somebody is originating a call in Guwahati. The processing of that call, the model should reside right in Guwahati itself, so that the entire process of call coming in, processing, model doing the needful work, converging into his language, converting into voice, giving to his device, everything should happen in millisecond. That is where I think our industry is waiting for us 20 years to have real use cases of edge data centers and edge processing. I think this is a use case the industry is waiting, and you will see, I would say, spread of edge data centers in India if voice telephony takes big way. Right now, we all are comfortable running all our GPUs, everything in central data centers, but once voice telephony at mass scale takes off, which I'm sure it will take, the promise it's giving, the mass scale edge data centers will have to come across the length and breadth of the country. And this is possibly, I'll just take this as my last slide, that how can you deploy? As I said, putting in this type of infrastructure, putting millions and billions of dollars, I think even if you are backed by the best of the private equity, nobody will give you that type of fund. The only solution in this case is cloud. But the moment you put on cloud, suddenly we feel what will happen to my data, what will happen to compliance, what will happen to risk. And that is where I think a technical solution that within a cloud environment, you are able to create air gaps. We are able to make sure that one customer's data does not get mixed with the other data, coupled with regulatory what is DPDP talking, for example, that user data should be private, it should not be disclosed. All those things is coming in. So the in-between solution, which I think word over I'm seeing, is neither you do everything yourself in-house, neither you do on any global cloud operator. You rather are trying to do within the boundaries of your country into a sovereign cloud, because the sovereign cloud operator is not conflicted between the laws of the land and laws of the parent organization into some different country. They'll follow the laws of the land. There'll be no doubt about it. So even if technically they try to do something wrong, government will catch them. The real solution for scaling of this will be that these solutions are adopted on sovereign clouds, which are not only running in central places somewhere in India, but also are deployed at the edge level also. And this actually shows that how exactly voice AI will work. There are many, many cost elements to that. If you have to do voice AI on a very, very large scale, ultimately in India, any and every technology solution become very, very successful. Like UPI is an example, and there are many, many examples. Our mobile adoption, everything is an example when you give the maximum benefits to user at lowest possible cost. Either you make it free, because the indirect benefits are very, very high, like UPI, or you make it so cost effective that people just adopt mass scale. So if you have to do that, every single of these elements which I'm talking about, whether it is the GPUs you are doing, whether the size of the model you're talking about, whether the telephony charges you're talking about, whether the storage of the data talking about, all these things will have to be done at such a massive scale that economies start coming in, and the usage of processing this voice telephony end to end becomes so low that people either are getting it free or people are paying a very, very small price to that, and that is something which will lead to a huge scaling up of this entire promise of, I would say, voice AI. And yeah, I think I've covered all this. Use cases are many. I'm sure other speakers will also be talking about the use cases of voice AI. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sunil, for giving an insight onto the entire infrastructure and telephony layer. And we'll hold the questions for the end, and we'll ask together with the group. Let me call upon the next speaker, Maitreya Wagh. Maitreya is founder of Bolna. Maitreya is building voice automation platform designed for real business workflows and customer engagement. His focus lies in simplifying how enterprises deploy conversational voice at scale. With that, let me invite Maitreya for the session.
Yeah, so I think Sunil did a perfect job at explaining what is important in voice AI infra, and as he said, there's very less tolerance to things breaking. And at the end of the day, you see voice AI agents today already. You might have had calls with voice AI agents. What Bolna is building is sort of the middle ground between the infra and the final agent or the final call, which is the orchestration layer, which sort of ties everything together. But the question is, does India need its own voice AI orchestration layer? What is special about this? So why does it matter, right? India speaks multiple languages, and there are multiple reasons why you need a specific to India orchestration platform. The first is privacy data residency. We talked a lot about speech to text, LLM, text to speech, telephony, different models. But most of these models run on GPUs and clouds based outside of India, which is a major problem in any hospital, any BFSI, any government level scale that you actually want to start reaching. Privacy data residency basically means that every model that is being run is either being run on Indian sovereign models or models hosted in Indian clouds, so that you are protecting the protecting the data of each enterprise that you're working with. Second is cost sensitivity. Over here, the difference between Indian enterprises and American enterprises is how price sensitive every call or every minute is. When at the end of the day, voice AI is automating labor which is much cheaper in India compared to anywhere else in the world, which basically means going down from 3 rupees a minute to 2.8 rupees a minute is a massive thing and a massive priority for Indian enterprises, but not the same in America. So that means making sure that you are utilizing tokens, both input and output, extremely well is something that is extremely important over here. And finally, when we say multilingual demand, it just does not mean picking up the right model. We'll talk about this more in this presentation. But India is one of the few countries which has a truly multilingual demographic, where people not only speak different languages, they speak many languages in the same sentence itself. And understanding those nuances is super important for any voice AI. So what are the complexities with multilingual voice AI? First is the default code switch. When a call starts, you are not sure what language the person is going to speak. Hiring for this is a massive problem which has not been solved, but voice AI can actually understand what language a person is comfortable speaking right from the first few sentences. From the first greeting sentence itself, the right models, the right prompts, the right code has to be brought into the platform so that the conversation can continue seamlessly in the language the user wants to speak. But even then, it's not one language. We speak Hinglish, right? Which means we speak the language in Hindi, but if I say teen, char, paanch, you might not even know what I'm saying because we're so used to speaking numbers in English. We're used to speaking email addresses in English. So that basically means that if the AI starts speaking to you with Hindi numbers, the person is going to be perplexed. That essentially means that you need to understand what is the weights and biases that a person gives to multiple languages and speak in that tone back to the human, something which which off-the-shelf LLMs are not really built for. A lot of things in voice AI are pre-built, such as alerts or things or guardrails or function tooling, which essentially means that a message will be sent that, hey, I'm fetching your calendar right now. But in a Hindi conversation, you can't have these to happen in English. So even these pre-recorded or predefined messages need to now be translated in the language the conversation is going in, so that the conversational flow is not broken. And finally, websites, PDFs, documents are all mostly in English, but sometimes in local languages as well. Even they need to be translated into the language of the call when the call is happening. Now, you might think that, hey, this is simple, right? Like, this is just translation. But this has to happen under 100 milliseconds. Because it's happening inside a call, it's not fine for you to completely run this from scratch. You have to make sure it is running while the call is happening without breaking the flow of the call, which is why a multilingual orchestration, similar to what we are building, is extremely important. But then what about humans in the loop, right? Like, we hear a lot about how AI has not completely automated things. You still need a human in the loop. And that we completely agree with that. There are still multiple layers in this space where we actively use human in the loop, either ourselves or with the clients we work with. Of course, we don't believe AI can handle every calls, any escalations, sensitive data, situations where customers have that bias that they need a human to solve it, need to be intelligently understood by the AI without the person having to say, hey, let me please talk to a human. We sort of build our agents around a way that we understand when the job that the AI was meant to do is not happening correctly. And with the context in the call, it gets seamlessly transferred to a human without the human having to specifically ask for this. Evals and analytics is still extremely new in AI. A lot of people talk a lot about how earlier a lot of time was spent in building things. That building things has now been taken over by AI. And that means testing is now becoming more and more human-led and more important. We need humans to define what good means, because good could mean different in different calls. Sometimes when a person says they want to talk to a human, a client might want them to transfer, whereas in other times they might want them to press a little bit more. So we allow the people who are testing our products to define what good means and then redefine our prompts to sort of meet what their definition of a good call is. And finally, audits are something we work on very closely with each of our customers, because at the end of the day, human intelligence still is something that is slightly superior to AI in certain situations. We do have humans who are spending hours every day, FDEs, building agents and having a level of complexity that they can bring into agents that sort of take agent prompts from 90% to 100%, something which is tough for AI to do autonomously. So what works in agent orchestration, right? As already Sunil has said, there are multiple models: speech to text, LLM, and text to speech, and telephony. Each model is either the cheapest or the quickest or the highest in quality. We don't really believe there will be one model to rule them all situation ever in the future. And that primarily means each call you do needs to run on different models for all of these layers. We have clients who are doing a call to someone sitting in the Mumbai office using the model which has the most modern form of English, which might be 11 labs today. But that same agent, if they're calling someone in Nagpur, it would be using Cartesia, which sounds a little more desi. And that same model, if you want to run it on a slightly cheaper, slightly cheaper sense, you would use Sarvam there, right? And we see that every week, if not every day, newer models are being built. And it is impossible for an agentic platform who are focusing on many different things to keep in touch with this. So that's where we come into use, because if you're building on a model today and that model suddenly is not the best for your use case tomorrow, if you're using an orchestration platform, it sort of becomes just a drop down that you have to change. And we feel that these models are going to grow more and more. We're seeing so many newer models, so many smaller models come up on a daily basis. Even like indie models being run in smaller universities and research labs, which are actually competing with these larger models in specific domains or specific metrics, such as being the cheapest or being the quickest. And we're really enthusiastic about like how this is going to play out in the future. Now, what are common failure modes in multi-agent flows? Like two places where voice AI breaks the most when you're doing complex AI calling. The first is understanding what went wrong, right? We've talked a lot about the complexities here. There's a STT that is translating complex multilingual speech into text. There is an LLM that is getting a response. There is a text-to-speech that might hallucinate, and a telephony which might break, right? Given our experience of telephony in general. What fails when a call fails? The customer is going to say, "Ye call nahi chala." What does that mean? right? At what point did something break? So the only way to solve that is to have detailed log tracing where you can understand what is the level that broke and then actually do the right escalation. The second thing is impact of changes, which basically means when you make a small change in the prompt, which is something you have to do on a daily basis, it could cause a cascading effect of problems that sort of completely ruin the final calling experience where you do not really understand that was happening. These are situations where you have to do regression testing across the full agent chain to find out at which stage what change you made is going to break. There are many observability, many new testing suite platforms coming up, and it's quite exciting to see them grow and sort of simulate how calls would run in the real world before someone has to try. However, today what we're seeing is clients still are doing this testing themselves manually. They do want to run 100,000, even with larger enterprises like 10,000 calls with their own team internally and sort of make sure that they're running before they're ready to put something into production. Finally, how do you measure real business impact? We believe voice AI helps in three things: saving time, saving cost, and scaling. Time saving, of course, recruitment processes take time because they cannot be parallel, they are linear. To hire 10,000 people, you have to do 10,000 interviews one after the other. And by the time you've done the 10,000 interviews, the first person probably has already found a new job. Voice AI really helps in these places where you can simultaneously call all 10,000 people and run things on a parallel level. Cost saved is probably the most important from the Indian context. Costs of constantly scaling goes beyond just salaries. It goes to infrastructure, it goes to getting an office space and laptops and all of that as well. Voice AI essentially allows you to scale seamlessly and at scale even reduce costs with the optimizations that you can start doing. And finally, ease of scale. Most of our customers, in fact, are not massive enterprises, but very rapidly growing companies. The point is, if a company grows 10x, growing your calling team 10x is impossible at the same time, which basically means you no longer remain close to your customers, which is a cardinal sin for any sort of company, right? Voice AI sort of essentials that sort of guarantees that you can scale your customer interactions, your inbound customer support requests, as well as how close you are with your customers without really going out of your way. And yep, that's basically it. So we're building orchestration, and I think now what is built on top of orchestration to make the final call really seamless? I think we'll have other people talking about that. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Maitreya. And I think layer by layer, it's getting interesting to know from infrastructure to the orchestration, how the voice AI is evolving. I think one of the core aspects of also voice AI is the policy and governance, is the data safe, is the consent taken, what are the governance around it. And to talk about the policy and government, let me invite Deepika Mogli Shetty. She's Chief of Policy and Partnership at Equitable Foundation. Deepika works at the intersection of technology, policy, and ecosystem collaboration. She focuses on enabling responsible, inclusive adoption of digital public technologies at scale. With that, let me invite Deepika.
Okay. Oops. Something happened. Okay. I'm just going to use my 7 minutes to go through the 7 slides very quickly. I'll try. Okay. The thing about voice is, I think we've been hearing so much about how AI will scale only through voice in India. And that's true. That is true. But when we think about voice, what is it that we need to think about is what I'm going to talk about. I think one thing you have to remember is that voice is also biometric. It's very different from any other form of data. So the sense of responsibility doesn't stop at merely saying, I've taken your consent. It actually goes beyond that to talk about what else am I taking care of so I don't actually violate your trust when I'm engaging with you, and also don't do anything which is beyond what I'm required to do. Yeah? So I want to make the proposition that this whole consent is only the beginning. It is not by beginning of the whole story. It's not by any means the end of the responsibility that we all have when you're dealing with voice. in India, we have sort of 3 layers of overlapping frameworks, and I want us to pay very close attention to this, partly because as far as I'm not, voice in it's like voice has existed, right? The previous speakers have spoken about voice. It's talked about telephony has existed, lots of things has existed. What does voice in the world of AI look like is the only question that you have to look at, right? So we can't pretend like there are no regulatory frameworks in place. We keep acting as if because it's not AI, there is no regulatory framework in place. Yeah? But I want to keep my conversation very much to voice AI without getting into the rest of it, because that could take a while. Digital personal data protection regime is now in force. It fully comes in force by May of next year. So all your consent and what you want to do with the voice data is a very integral part of that narrative, and that is in fact law. As far as AI is concerned, there is the AI governance framework, which has been recently released. It's not a law. And also because of the position India has taken in terms of thinking about this, because we've not decided to legislate AI yet. We've decided to allow innovation to happen, but with certain guardrails. So the governance framework gives us that framing. Is it nearly enough? Is it suggestive? These are all questions, much like it really depends on how the industry and the ecosystem decides to engage with it, either with responsibility, or you can just treat it as a suggestion. If you go by the name, in the way we actually deal with most suggestions like traffic rules, which is in fact law actually, or rules like you have to wear a helmet, which is also law, we treat those things as suggestions. So I'm quite curious to see how the ecosystem treats a guidance framework. If you treat it like wearing a helmet or not, we're in a little bit of trouble. Yeah, but I'm trying to tell you that that's what the system, I mean the government system has chosen this path, mostly to give space for innovation. Otherwise one could have legislated. Yeah. But what's also happening, and I'm using the third column really on the BFSI and RBI merely as an indicative example, which is a sectorial level frameworks and guidelines and regulations and guidances which are coming in, because more and more there's a belief that we may have to look at sectorial frameworks rather than overarching frameworks. This third column exists merely as an example. It's not by any means to actually push everyone in the room to think that that's the only framework that exists. Yeah? I want to talk about the consent problem, and what's on screen is essentially a comparison between what the law requires us to do and what actually happens. I won't read it out in a great amount of detail because in many ways it's quite self-explanatory. The problem is it's more our mindset and attitude towards law and what we think is required of us and what is actually needed from a safety perspective. If we were to approach this whole problem not as I need to take consent because I'm required to take consent, to I need to create a safe experience for my user because that's how I'm trusting and I'm creating trust and valuing my user, we may actually do a lot more things much more meaningfully and easier than ticking the box of consent. I of course have put a provocative statement there, which is where voice AI breaks the law right now. It's mostly to push people to think a little bit more. It's not to say that you're actually breaking the law. But these binaries of what happens and what's required is where all the debate I have encountered with product managers in domains across many ecosystems I'm part of, this is what I'm stuck with. Yeah? I think there are 3 risks enterprises are not ready for that will hit India first. This third-party trap, it's like it's not me, it's the other guy. And in AI, it's actually quite interesting because we end up having to blame the models for things and things like that. There are lots of other guys to blame. But when things go south, we may quickly find that we will not have the other guy to blame. because responsibility at some level will stick at the solution end also. So therefore taking it seriously is very, very important. The language bias blind spot, a good example could be, if we don't pay attention to the nuances of language, you're offering a loan to a Telugu speaking person, based on the information the person gave you, you've denied them the loan. Same facts a Hindi speaking person has given you, you've given them the loan. Why? Because your system just didn't understand them better. Now, that bias is very real, right? So it's not some model bias at the back end. It's actually like inability of having trained things properly or having paid attention to the requirements. So you're causing inherent differences here, which may you end up doing if you don't pay attention to language with that level of seriousness. So voice is not just voice, it's voice for something. So therefore language comes into the question of voice quite effectively. And also, lastly, of course, the deep fake liability gap. I think that's the highest sort of harm question. The liability gap here is also going to hit us fairly quickly if you're not careful. And you know this is already happening. It's not like this is, you know, the scams and all of that that we're engaging with. So what I want to just put on the table for us to consider is, how do you get prepared? How do you need to start thinking about things? And how do you get prepared? I think we are going to move into a framework. There's going to be a graded liability chain. Too many different parties are involved, so you can't actually put all the liability on one end. So it's likely to end up becoming a graded liability change, which means auditability, traceability, all of these questions. So short answer to the question is, start maintaining records. How your decision making is happening, record it carefully, thoughtfully. If something is not working, change it. Declare and show that you've tried to fix a problem. So we've been used to a world in which liability is about identifying someone's mistake and wringing their neck. You need one neck to hold. That framework of how to pin liability, we may have to rethink a little. Because if you change it to, okay, it is responsibility, I have tried to fix it, I have done this now, see, I made best efforts, even with best efforts this happened, okay, now let's what do. So that's sort of the new frame of thinking, rather than saying this guy violated the law, let me go catch his neck. I'm not saying we're there yet, but it's likely to end up like that because of the complexity of the ecosystem we are in. So the short thing that I think at this stage we need to pay attention to is about looking at how to enable accountability at every stage in the game and think about accountability at every stage in the game. And at some level also, a lot of responsibility within organizations and even kind of institutions where boards have to very seriously take ownership on this question of safety. I mean, it's safety in general, but I'm talking about it in the context of voice. It's not just the last mile, the developer who did something. It can't be left to that person, because in the end, that's how the systems are designed. But it's important that it actually be looked at it. And lastly, I think doing annual data audits and things like that. Basically, we're asking for more accountable behavior, which demonstrates a duty of care, rather than, oh, you messed up, let me penalize you. That may also be needed, but you have to put more onus on demonstrating of duty of care. I'm sort of restating what you have to prepare for. The DPDP compliance window is the next 18 months. Actually 15, 3 months are up. So that's definitely there. You will find a lot of sectorial frameworks and guidelines that will come up. So depending on which industry you're catering to, you will find some of that emerging, because we're seeing that happen already with BFSI. When DPDP enforcement begins, the world will change, and voice is going to be sitting in the middle of it, because you'll be making most amount of calls, and people will feel comfortable talking and saying things if you don't pay attention to proper consent frameworks. And that's the other thing, right? The entire industry is focused on how do we sound more human, which is great. But the problem with sounding more human, you also make people more vulnerable because they get comfortable and start saying things they wouldn't actually say to something that they thought was synthetic. So I think there is a balance there somewhere that one needs to work towards. I mean, there are a bunch of to-dos for voice AI companies, which I've mentioned already actually. Map the data flow, build your, the other thing is your deletion pipeline is as important as your collection pipeline. The reason is the point I made first, which is voice is biometric, which means if you store it and do things with it that people didn't realize, you are actually going to be crossing lines that you didn't imagine you were going to cross. So actually it's very important to be more accountable at every stage of how you're using this information. And I would certainly encourage limit purpose, limit collection, limit time. That's the only sensible way to deal with it, and localize as much as possible so the control is in the hands of the user and less in yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Deepika. What a great insights into a lot of policy and data guidelines that we often overlook as the ecosystem partners, and maybe something that everyone knows about it, but given so many other things to solve for, this gets often overlooked. So thank you for the session, and let me invite our next speaker, Mr. Devdutt Mukherjee, to represent the adopter side of the view, the enterprises, the corporates, the governments that which are adopting voice solution. How are their thought processes, what their constraint is. And let me introduce Mr. Devdutt. Devdutt leads AI initiatives and he's head of demand engineering at Meesho. And Meesho is one of the earlier adopters of the AI. And Devdutt brings deep experience in deploying AI systems at massive consumer scale. His work bridges advanced AI research with real-world production challenges. With that, let me ask Devdutt to come over.
Good evening, everyone. Cool. I think thanks for the opportunity, Santosh. It's a very important panel. I'm sort of visiting this summit, most sessions, especially where big representation from US or big tech is coming, people are like really surprised by the emphasis on voice AI. And this is one of the components or disciplines in AI which definitely needs to be led by India because it's very, very important for India. So thanks for organizing this panel. So I'll start with what user problems does voice solve, right? And I'll talk about two things here. The first thing, why... Is it better now? Yeah. So the first reason why it is important for India in particular, and we've been talking about this, but it could be extended to other nations in the global south or certain other demographic profiles which are not very sort of comfortable using mobile and technology, is what we call the thinking versus the typing gap, right? And I've been sort of in a lot of companies where we have processed Indic language content and Indic language text. And so even a simplistic phrase like kya chal raha hai, right, is sort of spelled out in like several hundreds of ways. We actually counted the number of spelling variations of every phrase that can happen. And it's a very painful experience, right? You're thinking in an Indic language, in your mother tongue, and you're trying to type using a alien English keyboard in Latin, and you make lots of mistakes, you take a lot of time, very, very far from efficient. And it's sort of the first reason voice needs to be a very, very important channel to solve for access, right? And to really provide that freedom of expression, which today is getting lost in translation. The other important problem, which is perhaps less talked about, but I think is like I would regard this as one of the top reasons why conversational systems, specifically in a lot of consumer internet apps, specifically e-commerce, there have been attempts at building conversational shopping agents, let's say. And by and large, they have not been successful. At least I don't see any single application which is really disrupted and made a large dent to how shopping works, or it could be extended to other domains as well. And one of the reasons is most consumer internet applications follow the feed UX, right? So people just open up the feed and then they keep scrolling, right, to discover. So that's how discovery works. It works through feed browsing. Now imagine if you put in a chat assistant, right? It'll cover half of the screen, which is anyway small. So you're sort of left with a very small real estate. And more importantly, like switching back and forth between this chat UI and the feed UI is very cumbersome, right? And so that's like one of the top reasons why, even though like LLMs are there and the technology is there, you would see chat assistants have really not disrupted consumer internet apps in a big way. And I feel voice has that opportunity, right? Because with voice, it's almost like you turn on a microphone and you can turn it off or on whenever you want. And the rest of the experience of browsing remains the same, right? It's almost like, hey, there is an additional partner who's just standing by your side and guiding you on how to use the app. And that's very transformative. And I think it's transformative for people who know the language and people who don't know the language. It's transformative for everyone. And I hope more attention on voice AI starts building, like giving rise to a lot of new products and new ways of navigating apps that we all use every day. Cool. So what are the trust barriers in adoption? And this is the tricky problem, and I think my fellow panelists talked about. So it can go two ways, but like the first thing is like when you are talking to a bot, right? The first impression that users have is, what do I expect out of this bot is not very clear, right? So very often when there is a voice bot that one is talking to, I mean, I'm sure all of you have gotten these calls and so on. And even if you have a problem, sometimes you're unsure whether, hey, can this bot actually solve this problem or not, right? And I think that is one key barrier, which is like what to expect, right? And that, of course, gets amplified if the bot starts making mistakes. You sort of almost feel that, hey, like this problem that I have, this bot cannot solve. So like whenever the voice feels unnatural or the conversation feels scripted, it feels repetitive, right? There is a trust barrier, and whenever there is a trust barrier, it's very difficult to overcome, right? So, and purely from this perspective, it is very important to design not just voice and like not perfect, like the text-to-speech and all of that, and that's a very large component of it, but also design conversation structures in a very humane manner, right? And in a sense that it is not feeling scripted, right? So, and when you can bridge this technology gap or like really sort of earn the trust of the customer. Yeah. On language and inclusion, I think this is one of the problems that we keep talking about, very important to solve in India, right? We often overlook the fact that there are 700 plus dialects which are active dialects, right? And thanks to the India AI Summit, there is a lot of momentum and narrative on this particular topic, and I feel very happy and proud that finally some momentum is gaining in this direction. It is really sad, right? Like, I mean, like the Hindi that you speak in Bihar and Rajasthan or Haryana are so very different. And like yet we sort of only talk about one language, right? The Tamil that you speak in Madurai and Madras are very, very different. So can you really have your agents go beyond the top languages that we are building for? And can you think, like, if you can do that, right? I mean, I feel that there is serious customer delight which can be unlocked, right? When your agent really speaks your dialect, it just feels like home. And then there are other issues like with dealing with background noise. Most of India is operating in very low bandwidth situation. So how do you make your solution work across all of these constraints? Behavior change versus novelty. I think till the last 2-3 years, I think we've had these voice assistants, and like we've talked to a lot of them, but like many a times it's really sort of built that strong retention, right? People have done good, cool things which sort of are good one-off, cool and fun use cases, but have failed to move beyond that. And to me, retention of pretty much any consumer product is defined when what you expect to the app to solve, it solves that, right? When that happens, when perception of the solution, you can deliver on that perception, retention happens, right? And in case of voice AI, right, I talked about trust and how it's important to cross that trust barrier, but it really boils down to the consistency in problem solving, right? Can you solve the problems consistently? Can you reduce friction, right? And that will drive retention. One of the things that I sort of feel here is many a times our AI agents have they jump into problem solving and action because of just how they are made. They do not understand the user's problem deeply, right? So how do you first clarify before acting? How do you confirm that your understanding of whatever solution you want to render is actually what the person requires? And then you can sort of probe deeper, but don't keep on probing unnecessarily. And then finally act, right? And wherever you are unable to deal with the situation, you escalate. So I think if you do these, you would get to that behavior change and you'll get to retention on your app. On measuring ROI, I think on ROI, the gold standard is, of course, how do you run A/B tests and prove that in A/B tests you're getting a significant lift on the business metrics that you care about. It could be conversion lift, it could be your CSAT and CES and some of those things in a support context. But many a times, depending on like how much sample size and how much throughput and you have, getting to that statistically significant outcome can be time consuming, right? So what is very important is very clearly define what are the leading indicators of success, right? So for instance, in a customer support context, maybe CSAT or CES is your outcome metric, but let's say getting a repeat call within the next day is a very good proxy of whether the solution is working or not, right? So do track leading indicators, define them and track them. And then what is very important is also deep observability, which brings me to the next point around building right feedback loops, right? So it's very important, and I think Maitreya and others talked about it, the importance of tracing all parts of your system, right? And it's important to not just for observability and spotting errors, but it's also important to treat this as your key go-to place to do continuous problem discovery, right? So rarely when you launch a voice AI assistant or any product for that matter, you would hit 100% of the problems. So how do you keep discovering problems and how do you keep solving them? You can only do justice to them if you have good feedback loops. Yeah, so I'll close with how do you unblock adoption at scale? Largely, these are the points that if you do well. So the first and foremost, you try to identify the most important high volume use cases and where you can add value. Start with the simple ones, which are low stakes, before going into the high stakes scenario. You treat reliability very, very seriously because that drives retention. So you track the correctness, the consistency of problem solving. Is it a tight latency? And can you recover gracefully whenever you're uncertain? And then treat observability and continuous improvement as your moat, right? So that's it. Wish you all the best and look forward to many novel and useful voice AI assistants coming through. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Devdut, for giving us the perspective of how the adopters look at it and how they look at solving problems at scale. But let me ask just one question to all the panelists and give me your perspective. If you have to look at it, the voice AI in the next 12 to 18 months, I'm not even going further down, what is the one unlock from your perspective which can take it to a scale, right? And from each one of your perspective, what is the one biggest unlock that India may need from the platform, infrastructure, benchmarking, policy, adoption perspective? And in any order, I would ask all of you to just take a moment, think about it, and if you could answer that, yeah.
Yeah, we've been talking about this, Santosh, offline. So I think one of the key unblocks that I personally feel is very important is in the space of wherever there is a user who's calling in is particularly anxious or frustrated. How do you empathize deeply, have a empathetic conversation? Certain times you will not be able to solve the problem, but at least you can lend a ear and try to pacify, do the best that you can, right? So these are very humane skills, which I feel the AI, we really need good research and some foundational breakthroughs before which we can sort of cross these boundaries. So, yeah, so that's one from my side.
Thank you.
Yeah. So one unlock that we are seeing happen as well is in the mindset of enterprises and customers, and of course even people speaking to voice AI. what we're seeing today is a lot of people, like when we're talking to clients or talking to people who want to adopt voice AI, there are still questions like, hey, will it sound human? And I think you talked about this very well, that the goal of voice AI is not to replace a human or to sound human, it's to solve a problem, right? And we see that in data just of our own calls, we see that the call drop rate in the first 10 seconds is extremely high. You pick up the call, there's a voice AI talking, you immediately cut it. After that, between 10 to 30 seconds, it's extremely low. And then again, it starts sort of tapering back up, which basically means that once you go beyond, why is this voice AI calling me? People are happy to have the conversation. We've had 15, 20-minute interviews, we've had long discussions about how should I plan my next Italy trip or whatever reason the call is happening. But I think there is this click that's happening. Even we measure the number of times someone asks, hey, is this AI?
Yeah.
That is reduced, for sure. But another thing that is reduced is people asking that, the AI saying that yes, and the call still continuing. That has gone up a lot.
Yeah.
So we're seeing that people are now understanding that yes, they can have a nice conversation with an AI if it is solving the problem for them. And no longer being that, how can I, and clients are no longer asking us, hey, will we be able to fool people into thinking this is a human? And I think that's the direction in which this should be going as well.
So it doesn't need to be human-like. It can be a bot and still can have a meaningful conversation.
Exactly.
Very
If
good.
you trust it, that will solve your problem. It probably will solve your problem today as well.
Sure. Thank you.
No, I actually concur with both the panelists. And see, fundamentally, we as humans, don't want somebody to act as what he or she is not.
Yeah.
So if you're an AI, declare you're AI, right? And I think we will still go ahead with that. We have, handled even regular, press 1, press 2, press 3. We have handled that also as much frustrated we may be, but we have handled till the time we know within, let's say, few seconds, it will give me some value add which I want to receive from that. So if AI is doing it, and AI obviously is going to do that role very, very beautifully in the right context, talking to the model, giving the right answers and all that thing. It can do a lot of conversations and, context-driven conversations. So, but I would say, if in some manner, right in the starting, instead of me asking, are you AI, and then it says I'm AI, actually declare I'm AI in some way, right? By some symbolism. I think that will rather add trust instead of reducing trust. Sure. And second, as I said, because we are not talking about talking to an interface and getting some answer, and then we have time for digesting what the interface is giving to me. But here I'm doing a conversation like I'm doing it with a human. So that speed, efficiency, no lagging in the whole conversation, no dropping the call, right? Yeah. All those things become very, very important. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Sunil. Deepika.
I think it's been occurring to me more and more over the last couple of days of listening to people is that because we are living in an AI world, we're expecting this thing to behave much better than we did as humans.
Yeah.
Our experience of call center calls are not really great. And that was a human on the other end. But the reason I make this point and why this has relevance on the policy front is, it is the opportunity to do better. So therefore, if we actually are able to your point of build trust by acting trustworthy.
Yeah.
So the one thing that I think will truly change is if we stop treating this idea of policy and consent and requirement as a requirement, rather than it is actually the most important thing I have to do because I have to take care of this person. Yeah. So that sort of sense of care, if we were to shift the mindset, this would move much faster and be more meaningful, because ultimately it's not about a perfect conversation, it's about solving the problem.
Yeah. No, I think thank you. Thank you for a wonderful session. I think this is one of the most richer content session that I have personally attended. So thank you for putting effort and bringing your thoughts to in this room. With that, we'll end the session by just giving you